The snow had a sound to it when it fell over the wolf's wood, a soft hiss like sap meeting fire, a whisper that made the spruce boughs shiver and release their burdens in slow sighs. Bran listened to it as if it were speech. He had learned against his will to hear the language of things that grew and endured. Wind spoke, water spoke. The old stones of Winterfell would speak too if he could walk among them. But Winterfell was far behind him now, burned, broken, and left to occupy him in dreams. And the trees here were strangers only in their names. They were kin in the older fashion, with roots tangled in the slow mines of the earth. From their silence, Bran gathered the shape of things. A doe passing by hours ago, a fox den deep under a wind-toppled oak, and the weight of a great black wolf that had moved through the night and not yet shaken the scent of salt from his pelt. Shaggy dog, he thought, mouth gone dry. Rickon. He lay in a nest of fir boughs, wrapped in the rough wool of a shepherd's discarded cloak, with summer warm at his back and Mira Reed stirring the coals into life. Hodor breathed softly beyond the ring of firelight, as regular as the turning of a mill wheel. Jojen's coughs came between, quiet and persistent, as if he feared to disturb something larger sleeping in the trees. The world was always larger now. Bran had never chosen that. It had opened around him like a second sky, and he had fallen up into it. He could smell the day before it came, the iron of cold, the dusty sweetness of old leaves caught beneath crusted snow. He let his hand work into summer's rough, and the wolf turned his head to press a weight of love into Bran's wrist. When he looked into summer's eyes, the world grew simpler. The stitchings of thought, the tangles of fear, those went away. There was the cold, the hunt, the knowing of path and prey. It had been easier to sleep when his dreams were only of running. It had been easier before Jojen's green sight and the voice of the trees asked him to choose. "Awake?" Mira asked, her voice a breath across the rim of the fire. Bran nodded. He did not say yes. Words were the tools of a narrower world. "He's near," he whispered, and Mira stilled, one hand cupped around the ember glow. "Shaggy dog?" Bran closed his eyes and saw again a black shadow slinking along a stream, head low, teeth showing in a grin that was not happy. "Rickon," he said, and the name fell into him like a stone into snow. It made a hollow that would fill with all his wanting. The hollow had been there since the crypts and the fall, and all the losses that had followed. But it was different when you put a name to it. Osha took him into the woods. They slept in a hunter's cave near a twisted pine. There's a rock like a broken tooth and... You saw this? Jojen's cough caught, and he pressed a fist to his mouth, leaning forward from his blanket. His skin looked thin as paper where the fire lighted it. The reedsman had always seemed to Bran a story pulled out of a bog. Frog slick, moss soft, all muted colors and quiet speech. Jojen had a way of looking at a thing until it had no secrets left. It made Bran want to lie, just to keep some corner of himself in the dark. But Jojen Reed had shown him that the dark knew his corners already. "In dreams," Bran said, and Summer's ears pricked to the sound of the word. Dream was wrong. It was more than that. It was the roots of the world breathing. But the others would not thank him for a sermon. "In the trees," he added, "the weirwoods remember him. They miss him. Like the rest of us." Mira's mouth softened. "We will find him," she said. Today," Bran said. He ate the food Mira put in his hands. Smoked fish chewed to softness, half-frozen berries that burst like rubies between his teeth, and let the wolf reflex swing his gaze through the brush around their makeshift camp. The trees had not yet learned the taste of blood today. That was good. He wanted no fresh dead in these woods. He wanted a brother with hair tangled by the wind and a stubborn mouth, and Osha's rough laugh rolling out from some shadow with a blade in it. They left the bough shelter to the snow and moved beneath the spruce. Summer took the lead, nose working, his paws putting down a rhythm Bran felt in his own chest. Hodor pushed Bran's sledge, careful and strong, saying Hodor in a dozen ways. Curious, cautious content, like a child singing to himself. Bran did not need reins with Summer in front. The wolf knew where they were called. He knew, too, where Bran's spirit could slip and run inside his body. It felt sometimes as if Summer were the one to haul him through his days, and not Hoder with his great back and gentle hands. He tried to be grateful for both. He was careful of the wolf dreams now. He kept them tucked inside himself like a secret fire. Some nights he banked them to coals and slept human and cold, hands fisted under his chin, dreaming of a hall with broken towers and the taste of warm bread. Some nights he let the flames race. He ran through Winterfell's godswood with the scent of the old gods in his lungs and the ash bark groaning beneath the wind. He learned the movements of ravens like letters. He swam in pools that were only mirrors of the night. All of that had brought him here, drawn by a thread the Reed's boy had named, but never claimed to own. Bran did not think anyone owned the thread. The thread ran back through all the bloody feasts of men to a time when they had sat shivering in caves and asked the trees for a story that would keep the cold out. The story had teeth and hunger. The story had wolves. They found the broken tooth rock after midday. The sun had only the strength to throw pale bars through the branches. Beneath the rock's leaning shadow was a shallow bowl scooped from the snow, crusted with old ash, marked by the print of a small boot and the drag of a wolf's tail. Bran put his hand to the boot print, and Summer whined low, nosing at the ground as if he could make the scent rise out of last night and become a boy again. "Osha's work," Mira said, touching the ash with the back of 2 fingers to test what the heat had left. She banked their fire well. The prince go west. Jojen knelt with a slowness that made Bran want to tell him to save his strength. He would not listen. The boy's stubbornness was as much a part of him as his quiet. "West," Jojen murmured. "To the river, and then north again, keeping to cover." He pointed where the spruce gave way to bare-boned birch. The prints were a child's, flanked by long strides that left toes angled outward, ready to break into a run. "Ramsay's men go too far these days," Mira said. "Best to avoid the river road. Osha never lost her sense for hunters. She will be taking no chances with him." "Nor with us," Jojen said gently. "She will expect us in time." Bran did not ask how Jojen knew that. He had learned that the Reach children would not explain themselves beyond a point. Their words were like twigs they snapped to mark a path that only those who moved a certain way would see. But the words were not needed here. Bran closed his eyes and reached down into the long roots, into the water that ran cold as iron under the earth. He put out his thought as if it were a hand and called to a brother he had never stopped missing. Not even when Robb had ridden away with banners snapping and a promise to come home in summer. The answer came on 4 silent feet. Shaggy Dog slid from the brush like a shadow peeled loose from a tree and crouched low, teeth bared in a snarl. He was larger than Bran remembered, and more scarred. A notch tugged at one ear. His coat had the black of wet slate, and the green-tinged sheen of wolves seen through leaves. He did not come to Bran, not to Bran, not to Summer, with the easy sudden joy of shared blood. He circled, head down and eyes a wild green that caught the little sun and made it a threat. "Easy," Bran said. The word nothing next to the smell he sent. Kin, pack, warm milk, and the musk of a bedding chamber, where 4 small bodies had tumbled together through winters of stories. He felt Summer answer with a push like a shoulder into his mind. And the world shifted around the axis of smell. Their shared past rose up. A hall echoing with hounds, meat grease on fingers, the rustle of silk, and the clack of needles where Mother sat by the fire. The old dog Kaya's bark, Maester Luwin's rueful smile when the pups had chewed through a leather thong. He sent all of it over the snow between them, as if it were a bridge. Shaggy Dog came a step closer with his lips tight over his teeth and his hackles up. The snarl fell away piece by reluctant piece. He put his nose to the ground, to Summer's tracks, to the stirred ash where a child's boot print had creased the crust of snow. He lifted his head. His mouth opened in a silent pant. "Rickon?" Bran said, and his voice broke on the name. A boy's voice, rough as bark and fierce as a little king's, came from the brush to their right. "Stay where you are." Then, lower, as if he were speaking to a dog, "Shaggy, come away." Rickon stepped into view with Osha's hand fixed like iron around his arm. He was big for his years, still small enough to be swallowed by Bran's memory, but not the soft-limbed child who had clung to Robb's leg and howled when men went away. His hair fell in a tangle. His eyes were black bright coals. He looked like a boy who had not seen a bed in months, only nests of leaves and a woman's shoulder. Osha looked exactly as Bran remembered. Fierce, watchful, her blade out and her knees flexed to move. She saw the sledge and Hodor, and then Mira and Jojen, weighing them like game to be run from, or killed, or spared. Then she saw Bran Wintersnow. Bran broken. Bran who had laughed from a tower once, and something went soft and unguarded at the corner of her mouth. Little Lord. Her voice was a rasp and a caress. You're far from the tree you fell out of. Hodor. Hodor said with a weight of feeling that made the name feel like a greeting from the old days. He took a step as if to scoop Rickon up, and Rickon sprang back with his teeth bared to match his wolf's. Don't, Osha snapped, though her eyes had already found summer and her shoulders eased another fraction. Look well before you leap, Hodor. Your arms have grown since I saw you last. They have, Bran said, because it gave him a moment to swallow the spiky mix of joy and pain at seeing his brother breathing cold air in front of him. You ran, he told Rickon, and realized as he said it that he had no right to make it a question or a reproach. They had all run. You're safe. Rickon's mouth trembled. Safe? From who? The hall burned. The Ironmen took me. The men with flayed men on their banners ride the roads with skins drying by their cook fires. Where is safe? Then she. With me, Bran said, and Osha's hand closed still harder on Rickon's arm. Bold words, she said, not unkindly. Are you a maester in your own head now, to sling them like chain links? You can't stand. The world's full of men like dogs with broken legs. Half the north is that now, and every one of them biting. Bran let the words fall and did not bite back. He was too full for anger. The boy before him had his father's face in him, younger and wilder, and the quick bend of his mouth that had been Arya's. I can stand in other ways, he said, and when Osha's brows twitched down, Jojen made a small sound that might have been a laugh. He can, the Reed's boy said. And you'll want him to, if you want the north to be something more than bones on a frost field. Osha's eyes slid to Jojen. You're the children from the swamps. You whisper to the trees and the rivers listen. Men aren't rivers. No, Jojen said. They are narrower. A breath of sound came out of Osha's nose, quick and almost a snort. Maybe. You fire? There's frost in the boy's hands. Give him a seat and let him eat. And then tell me where you think you're going. Bran did not mean to cry. The first tear shocked him with its heat against his cheek, then froze a moment later in the wind. Rickon did not cry. He came a step forward, and then another, moving sideways like someone approaching a dog that might bolt. He put his hand, small and cold, on Summer's shoulder, and Summer leaned into it as if the boy were the one holding him up, not the other way around. Shaggy Dog shouldered in and butted Bran's leg, Hodor's leg, the sledge leg. It did not matter, and snarled as if to say mine. Bran's laugh made his chest ache. They built their fire under the broken tooth. Osha proved herself with the knife and the quickness of her hands. Mira proved herself with food conjured from a reed-woven bag that had seen better summers. Jojen shook out a pot and turned a handful of dried roots into a broth that smelled like remembered kitchens. Hodor hummed and brought wood. Bran watched Rickon eat with his head down and his hand wrapped around the wooden bowl, as if someone might try to take it. He watched the way Osha's eyes tracked the trees and then returned to the boys. He felt the weight of the watch she had kept and would keep if they let her. It isn't safe, Osha said, when the bowls were empty and the last of the broth steamed pale on the snow. Any direction you choose is a blade one side and a trap the other. We can hide the boy, but every living thing in the woods hides from the cold. Hiding's a kind of dying made slow. She cut a look at Bran. You say you can stand other ways. Speak plain. Bran reached for the roots. He could talk about banners and houses and old fealties braided into newer treacheries. He could make a list of those who were lost to them. Old Nan's stories had not prepared him for the number of names a boy could carry like stones in his mouth. He could plan a road by rivers and woods and say they needed the secrecy and the slowness and the watchfulness of rabbits. But all the plans were too small for what the cold was doing to the world. "I can stand in the trees," he said. "I see from the ravens. I run with the wolves. You won't believe me because it isn't something men do anymore, but that's true of a great many things. You have to decide if you care what men do. The old gods care what we do. They are watching, Osha. They watched when Theon took Winterfell. They watched when the Ironmen burned the hall. They watched the flayed men in the snow. They see further than the next fire. If I am part of that seeing, I should be where the seeing matters." Nendo. Jojen's eyes half closed, a mark of something like approval. Mira's mouth turned up on one side. Hodor, who had never needed to be convinced of anything beyond bearing and bread, said, Hodor, with a nod that could have been a benediction. Osha wiped her knife on her thigh and sheathed it. "Little lord," she said softly, and when she said it this time, there was no scorn in it. "There's a bite to you now. I don't like it, but I respect it. Speak the part that tells me where your feet go." "Back," Bran said. The word tasted like smoke and cold air. "Back to Winterfell. Back to the Godswood. Back to a place we can name the old things from." "Dandarawa." Osha recoiled as if someone had tossed a brand under her skirts. "Back to Winterfell? To a hall burned and a keep full of ghosts? To the Boltons if they hear breath in those chimneys? You mean to hang the boy in the window and light him like a lantern to bring every wolf and worse down on us?" "Not to the hall," Bran said. "To the roots. To the crypts." Rickon's head snapped up. His eyes had always been too old for his face. Bran remembered him making a crown of mud and tears when Robb had told him he must stay behind. Remembered him biting a man hard enough to draw blood. "To the crypts," Rickon said. "With the kings. With father." Bran felt the name hit him, like a blade pressed through cloth. He wanted to reach for Rickon's hand. He kept his hands on his lap instead. His legs had taught him a kind of stillness that made men trust him. "With father," he said. "He had asked me to keep you safe. He died," Rickon said, with the flat, merciless chirp of a raven's voice. "Robb died. Mother died. They all died. The trees didn't keep them alive. Nenderwenda." "No," Bran said. "They didn't, but they remember them, and that's a kind of keeping too. We are not done with father, and the North is not done with us." Osha spat into the snow. The spit froze in a heartbeat, a small green jewel against the white. "If you go there, you must know every rabbit hole in the ground and every fox den in the stones. The boy with the black wolf is no secret." She looked at Shaggy Dog, who was lying with his head on Rickon's foot, and shook her head. "Wolves don't hide their light. Then we let it burn," Jojen said softly. "We're beyond hiding. The flayed men are burning their light too. It draws things. Like crows," Mira said. "Like men who claim they know what's best for a world that goes on without them." Bran thought of a cold stone throne in a cave of roots and bones, and of a man so white that he could only be part of winter. He squinted into the snow and tried not to see the shape the trees made when they leaned together in secret. "We won't be alone," he said. "We never were. The North is not dead. It's sleeping like bears. It wants to wake to a voice it knows." Then, Rickon's hand crept into the edge of Bran's cloak. He held on with a pressure half shy, half stubborn. "Are we going home?" he asked. And to hear that from a mouth that already knew how to snarl made Bran's throat close. "Yes," Bran said. "We are going home." They went by the small roads, if roads they could be called. Deer tracks filled with wind, old hunters' paths that knew the curve of a body learning to be quiet. Osha led. Mira and Hodor moved like water around what she knew, and Jojen walked with the determined fatigue of someone always on the edge of a fever. The wolves flowed like ink. Bran kept his gaze northward and downward, into the roots and the stone veins beneath them. He did not need to know what waited on the King's Road. That was for men who wanted dust in their lungs and spear points in their bellies. He wanted the understory, the way the old things whispered among themselves. He dreamed of Winterfell and woke into a closer picture of it than the last. Walls and wells and tunnels aligning in him as if a hand were drawing them with chalk onto the inside of his skull. They came to the mill by the White Weir, where once Arya had stolen a boy's breath and made a shape in the river that would always be hers. Bran had not known that then. He knew it now, the way he knew the curve of the rope bridge and the squeal of the wheel in frost. He knew where the ice thinned and where someone could break through and drown for the want of a careful foot. He said nothing. There was no kindness in giving Rickon that story. He had enough stories to carry. They crossed at the shallow stones and slept that night in the belly of a fallen tree. Osha's knife at the entrance, Shaggy Dog curled like a punctuation mark. In the morning, the ravens were bold. They came as if called. Bran sat very still with one on his forearm, feeling the jabs of its feet through cloth, and fed it a strip of saltfish. It cocked its head at him, and its eye was a glass bead that saw past him into everything he was not asking. He did not put himself into it. He only watched it and let it watch him until it remembered an air current that would take it where it was already going. It left a drop of something black on his sleeve, and he wiped it away with a thumb and brought his thumb to his tongue. The taste was wood smoke and snow. Crows, Osha said, watching the sky. They'll tell on us if we give them reason. Birds are worse gossips than cooks. They're not the kind of crows you mean, Jojen said, and Osha shot him a look that said all crows meant hunger in the end. Bran wondered, briefly, what his father would have made of the Reed children and their moon-eyed talk. He wondered what father would have thought of his son making places in his head for trees. The last miles were the worst because they were the last. The snow lied about distance there, and the cold had teeth even Osha's fire could not blunt. Bran could have gone faster as summer. He did not. He did not want to step into Winterfell like a wolf through a hole in a fence. He wanted to roll up to his father's walls behind the sound of Hodor's breath, and the soft scrape of the sledge, and the small sound that Rickon made when he slept. He wanted to give the place time to feel them coming. He had loved the hall as a boy in the way that boys love room to run, and the smell of dogs and the weight of a father's hand on his head. But he loved Winterfell now, the way he had learned to love the bones under his skin. It was old, and it would endure. And when you love old things, you moved carefully around them. You did not slam a door in a house of memory. You knocked, even if you had the key. The gate was not a gate anymore. It was a mouth with blackened teeth. The soot on the stones did not come off when Bran touched it. It left an echo on his fingers, a taste of ash that would not be washed away with snow. Hodor had tears on his face and did not know it. Osha's jaw was tight. Rickon went fierce and small, and put his back to a broken piece of wall, as if he could hold it up by anger alone. Bran breathed. He had not understood when he had dreamed himself here night after night, that coming would feel like this. Not triumph, not relief, but a kind of terrible intimacy, as if he were looking at someone he had loved in her sickness, and seen the disease and not the person. We shouldn't have left it, Rickon said, voice high and raw. We shouldn't have left. We weren't asked, Osha said quietly. We were driven like rabbits. Bran did not answer. He closed his eyes and put slow, careful hands into the air beneath the ground. He found the tunnels by feel, the old ways by the way they remembered being walked. He found the well with the iron chain and the half-collapsed passage that still knew how a boy's shoulders fit when he turned sideways. He found the step carved into the foundation stone by a mason, with a fussy hand 300 years ago. He felt where the mason had smoothed it when it cut his palm. He found the cold air speech of the crypts, that strange emptiness that was not emptiness at all, but a fullness of what was not here, and never would be again. He put his mind to it, like you put your face to the wind to see how fast the storm is coming. Through here, he said, and the sledge bumped over char and stone and into an alley that had known laughter once, and now knew only the flit of rats. He guided Hodor to the broken earth where Maester Luwin had shown them children's mysteries. And there was the door, char-crusted but iron. Osha crouched and brushed ash away from its edges. She put her hand to it and looked at Bran. There are things that shouldn't wake, she said. There are things that should never sleep, Bran answered. And he was surprised that the voice that came out of him sounded like it knew the difference. They went under. The air changed. It grew colder and older and dry as kept secrets. Hodor's steps made a careful thunder. Rickon went before them, Shaggy Dog a black wing at his side, and the boy slowed without being told. when the faces began. Some of the Stone Kings had lost their noses to damp and time. Their swords lay across their laps. The wolves at their feet were thin as the idea of wolves. Bran felt something in himself straighten in this place. He had thought it would be otherwise. He had thought grief would knock him down here. Instead, the grief spread out in him like a rug, made a flat surface he could put his feelings on, one by one, and look at them in a light that did not flicker. They came to the place where the new stone lay, the place where they had put Eddard Stark. Bran did not touch the stone. He did not kneel. He had no illusions that the man who had held him on his knee and told him stories of the Barrow Kings slept beneath his hand. He slept in the way the North slept. He slept in the way the snow remembered footfalls, and the way the wind remembered the curve of a man's ear. But Bran thought that if there were any father in the stone, it might hear him better if he spoke into it without making begging noises. "We're home," he said. "We'll keep it." Rickon's shoulders slumped. He pressed his forehead to the edge of the slab. Shaggy Dog lay down as if the stone were a hearth. Osha stood back a pace and folded her arms. Mira made a shape with her hands that might have been a prayer. Jojen took a breath like a boy surfacing after a long dive. "We are not enough," Osha said, when the quiet had sat with them a while and become something like another person in the crypt. "No," Bran said. "But we are a beginning." "How?" Mira asked. She sounded like someone checking the binding of a spear before throwing it. "The Boltons hold the Dreadfort and call Winterfell theirs when they want to laugh. The Freys are salt in every wound. The Manderless, well, those fat men have their fires and their secrets." Greyjoys gnaw at the shore. "The South is a harsh master and a worse friend. What you make here must be more than a story told in a cold hall." "And an hour." Bran looked at the Stone Kings in their row, the wolves at their feet. He looked at the boy with his head pressed to his father's slab. He looked at Hodor, big and patient, who would carry whatever was put in his arms as if it had been given by God. He looked at Jojen Reed, as fragile as a glass full of swamp water, and as stubborn. He looked at Mira, whose hands were quick, and whose heart was loyal, and who had walked all this way with a boy whose legs would not take him. He looked at Osha, fierce as any woman he had known, who had chosen the wolves when the cats had all grown fat. "We'll call," Bran said. "We'll call the North. Not with trumpets and banners, not at first, with roots, with the old ways, with what no man can take away from a place by cutting down a man or burning a hall. We'll call in a way that reminds them who they are." Jojen's mouth bent. "A Winterfell," he said, almost smiling. "You mean to let winter fall and use the way it carries sound?" "Yes." Bran could see it now. He had seen it for nights, but only here did it arrange itself into a picture he could put words to. The trees speak. They speak to each other. They will speak for us if we ask them as kin. There are still lords who sit beneath leaves and remember the names carved in the bark. There are old women who bring their dead to a face of a tree and tell it the stories of their house. There are men who keep a blade bright for a promise they made when the world was green. Well, ask. The asking will carry. It will find yours that went to harp. "And your brother," Osha said almost in a whisper. "What do you make of him? Your king in the South." Bran did not flinch. He had learned a long time ago that the sharpness of a word did not change if you closed your eyes at it. "Robb is gone," he said softly. "I have felt that loss more times than I can count. I feel it now, even here. But father is not gone. He is a shape the North still wears. And Rickon lifted his head. His eyes were red but dry. He stared at Bran with the unsoft gaze of someone who had been told too many things were out of his hands. "What about Rickon?" he asked. Not so much a question as a dare. Bran reached for him and did not touch him. He was careful around the boy's edges. They could cut. "You are the youngest son of Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully," he said. "You are the last Stark who has walked in Winterfell's snow and seen the stones with living eyes. I was meant for other paths. I can be a Stark in other shapes. The North needs a name to gather around. It needs a boy with a wolf at his heels and a voice that rings here." He thumped his sledge once with his palm. The sound ran along the stone like water. "There are names the South makes, and names The North makes. We will make our own name here. Wander. Rickon blinked. Something old moved in his face. It might have been pride. It might have been fear. He swallowed. What name? Warden, Bran said. And the word did not sound like an Iron Throne's word in his mouth. It sounded like the thing men had always done when winter came. Set a watch, make a guard fire, keep a story at the edge of the night. Warden of the North. Not the South's warden, not a chain with a golden hand at the other end. A keeper. A watcher. One who says who eats and who freezes, who lives and who dies, and does it by the old laws. One who knows when to open the hall and when to bar it. One who knows the smell of a storm before the ravens speak it. One who puts his hand on the stone here and feels the weight of it and does not drop it. Bow. Rickon, Osha murmured. And there was both warning and wonder in the sound of his name in her mouth. Rickon stood up. He took a breath that squared his shoulders in the way of a boy who had never liked being small and had found a way not to be. He looked at the stone slab, and then at Bran, and then at the dark gape of the crypt beyond, where the kings of winter sat their endless watch. He reached out and laid his palm flat on the stone. The cold of it went up his arm and made a muscle jump in his jaw. I don't want the South's names, he said. I want ours. Bran's heart hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Then take it, he said. There was no crown to set on the boy's head. There were no lords to shout no king but the child of winter. There was only a handful of people in a long stone cave, and the ghosts that lived in the memory of old stone. Jojen took a step closer and put his hand on Rickon's shoulder, and Mira did too, and Osha turned her head away as if something private were happening she had not expected to witness. Hodor came up last, his great hand trembling, and laid the tips of his fingers on the boy's knuckles. Where they touched the slab, the wolves lay as if carved. Say it, Bran told Rickon, and his voice came from somewhere deep. Say I will keep it as winter keeps. Rickon's mouth opened, and when he spoke like a boy who had learned to make his voice carry in the woods, not in a hall. I will keep it as winter keeps, he said. The words shook the dust. And as wolves keep, Bran said. As wolves keep, Rickon said. And as stones keep, Bran said. As stones keep, Rickon said. And as the old gods keep. Bran felt a tremor run up from the stone into his hand. It crossed to the sledge and went up his arms like a memory of walking. He almost laughed at that. He did not. He let the feeling pass through him without trying to make a thing of it. Say it. As the old gods keep, Rickon said, and the air turned a little, as if some door that had always been half shut had swung wider on its hinges and let in a deeper cold. They stood in silence then for the length of a kettle coming to boil and cooling again. It was Osha who moved first. She let out a slow breath and scrubbed at her face with the back of her hand. Right, she said. Right then. If he is to be a warden, he'll need more than wolves and old stones. He'll need men who will stand when he says stand and sit when he says sit. He'll need bread and wood stacked and blades that know which end to put into a man. He'll need watchers at the walls and runners with quick feet to carry words faster than ravens if the air turns wrong. He'll need a hand to keep the ledger and another hand to keep the keys. Nadine, you'll stand? Mira asked, half smiling. Osha bared her teeth. I'll do what I've been doing since the world took a leaning. Keep him alive. She looked at Rickon and then at Bran. But I won't put him in the path of what we can step aside of. Hear me, little lord who learned to be a tree. We will make your warding if the North will have it. If not... She cracked her knuckles one by one. If not, we'll take the boy and teach him to be a different thing, and try in another winter. Bran nodded. There was honesty in her that made it useless to speak soft. If not, he agreed. But they will. The North remembers what it is. It's almost a superstition with them, the way they like to pretend at forgetfulness. When they remember hard. We'll need a first name to call, Jojen said. The beginnings of all things are the most important. A first friend, or a first enemy. It's much the same if you mean to draw lines. Bran considered. He saw banners in his mind. Direwolf, Merman, Flayed Man, bear, pine tree, and let his thought choose one. It was not the boldest choice. It was the truest. The manderless, he said. Wyman sits soft, but his roots go down. He listens to what older things say. And he's a practical man. He made himself heavy so no one could move him if they tried. Mira laughed outright. You plan to move him with a whisper. No, Bran said. I plan to move him with the memory of a promise his house has kept and broken, and kept again for 1,000 years. He will remember Davos Seaworth before his cooks are through their pies. He will remember every debt he has measured out with sauce. He will want a thing to be proud of in a story he tells himself about Wyman Manderly. He looked at the slab. He will want a Stark at Winterfell. Then we send a message, Jojen said. His eyes gleamed feverish in the torch faint. Not with the river, not with the road, with the roots. He looked at Bran. Can you? Bran let his breath out slowly. He closed his eyes. He put his hand flat on the stone the way Rickon's had lain, and he put his mind down into the cool of it. He found the places where water had seeped over centuries and made a web of whispers. He found the faces of the weirwoods, their sap flowing sluggish and sweet under bark. He found the moss in the cracks, the worm paths, the spider's bead silver web in a corner where no hand had reached in 6 summers. He found the tree above, scarred and stubborn, with the old man's face cut in it by a knife he could almost feel if he let himself. He moved into that and felt the sap in slow pulses. When he spoke, he did not speak with his throat. He set the words in the sap and let them go. He spoke in the old way. Pictures and feelings, and the taste of words more than the words themselves. He told the trees that a boy had set his hand on his father's stone and named himself Keeper. He told them that wolves lay by stone and breath steamed and men were needed. He told them a name, Manderly. The trees had known that name for a long time. It tasted of salt and fat and something green from a place where trees were not the red of northern gods. He told them what he wanted of them. Carry this, as you have carried the memory of snowfalls and broken vows and babies named for storms. Send it along your roots. Whisper it to your cousins. Let it pass to the hedge by the river road, where a man might lean to piss and feel something old put a thought in his spine. He felt something answer. It was not a voice in any way that men would recognize. It was a kind of turning in the sap. It was a door opening to let a smell through. It was the difference between a sleeping dog and one that has lifted his head in the night. It went away from him at once, not because it did not care, but because it knew exactly where it was going. Bran opened his eyes. He found he had taken Hodor's hand without meaning to. He let it go. Hodor patted the stone as if comforting it. Done, Bran said, and the word felt too small but also right. We wait. Waiting, Osha said. That's a thing I know how to do. They did not wait like people who had given themselves to idleness. Osha put Rickon to work the way a woman who has never unlearned hard winters puts every hand to use. He learned to cut wood properly and not waste bark. He learned to clean a blade with snow and oil it by a fire the size of his palm. Mira taught him how to set a snare that even a fox would admire before it died. Hodor took him for pulls around the yard until his lungs were bellows and he could laugh without coughing. Jojen talked to him the way he talked to anyone, soft and sideways, and showed him how to sit in the dark and listen for the thing behind the thing. Rickon learned because he had not forgotten how. Children do not stop being children because the world climbs on their backs and shouts. They learn to carry. Bran gained a place while he waited. He rode summer at dawn, not in the body but in that other way, and ran the walls pretending they were whole. He counted the rats in the west cellar. He found where the well water was still cleanest. He spoke to the tree and felt it listening. Sometimes he sat with his back to the stone and told his father what he was doing. He never asked for advice. It wasn't that he thought there would be none. It was that some respect must be shown. The dead had done their part. The living must do theirs without asking to be spoon-fed like children. He wasn't a child, not in the way that mattered. On the 5th day, a raven came, fat and sleek and combed by the wind. It had a scrap of vellum tied to its leg, and the seal on the scrap was fish and trident, not merman. But it did not matter. It was a line. Bran held the message and did not break the wax. He pressed it to the stone and felt the cold of it, and then handed it to Mira. She broke it with her thumb and read. It says, she said, and her voice had the careful flatness of someone reading a message that might be a trap. That a certain steward is in White Harbor, who remembers a boy with a broken leg and a she-wolf with leaves in her fur, who came once to eat oysters and remember the taste of salt. It says a certain lord's cooks have pies cooling, and it would be as well if the folks who wanted to talk about old fealties did so before the pies went stale. It says the fisherman who brought this bird will wait in the cove that used to belong to the rabbit men 3 nights hence. It says all the right men have no names at the bottom. And now, Osha spat into the dirt again and nodded. That's Manderley, she said. Pies and secrets. If we go quiet. If we go with wolves. Bran felt a pressure behind his eyes like the first ache of a storm. We'll go, he said. But we won't beg them. We'll take the boy to the place and show them who he is, and ask them if they are who they say they are in the stories they tell themselves at night. And if they aren't? Rickon asked. Then we make a different story, Bran said. He smiled, and it felt strange on his face, as if it had not been used for serious matters before. They prepared. Osha laid out what they would carry. Less than a feast, more than a fast. Mira cut and patched, and put the sharpness of new sinew into old leather. Hodor hummed and took the weight of what could be borne by mere muscle. Jojen closed his eyes and said nothing for a long time. When he opened them, the fever was riding him again. He leaned and rested his head against the stone of the crypt, and did not speak, even when Mira put her hand on his hair. Stay, Bran said, low enough that the stone drank the word. Rest. We'll need you when the names begin to come back to us. Jojen did not nod. He did not need to. His stillness agreed. They went out at dusk, wolves behind them, Winterfell's breath on their necks. The snow had a different sound when you left a place you loved, and went toward a place that might remate it. It hissed in a way that spoke not of falling, but of being pushed aside. The trees leaned together, and the face in the godswood looked down through a veil of frost. Bran could have sworn, no, not sworn. He did not speak like men to magic, that the carved mouth had softened. The old gods did not smile. But they could, perhaps, be less stern. Warden, Osha said, handing Rickon a sling wound from leather and sinew. Keep that hand warm. You'll need it to write later, when you start telling men where to put their grain. The work of keeping is half thinking and half counting, and we've only one boy here who likes numbers. Rickon made a face. It cleared fast. He took the sling and looped it over his shoulder. He put his hand to Summer's back for a moment, then to Shaggy Dog's, and the wolves took that as the shape of what the evening would be. They walked as if they were his shadow. Tell me again, Rickon said, when they had put the ruined towers behind them, and the road had narrowed to a ribbon through pines. What am I? Bran looked at him. The boy's breath came white, and it looked like words made visible. A warden, he said. A keeper of the North. Not because a king said so. Because the North does. Good, Osha said. Remember it every time someone taller than you tries to lean their shadow over your food. They went down to where the white knife could be heard talking under its breath in the dark. The rabbit men were gone from their cove. The shoremen who had used the place for traps before a larger danger had taught them what men and rabbits had in common. In their stead was a single lean boat, with a low-cut sail, and a man who did not look at them until they were nearly on his gunwale. When he did, he had a face like a fish long dried and salted and left to hang, all creases and calm. Cold for fishing, Osha said, testing. Good for pies, the man said, and flicked his eyes to Rickon. You'll want to keep your head down if you've a head worth keeping. There are folk on the river who sell heads to men with a taste for such meat. Men who eat heads, Rickon said, trying to keep his voice severe and only half managing. Men who eat anything, the boatman said, unmoved. Climb in. They did not bring Hodor. They left him with Jojen and the stone and the tree. Because someone strong must always be left to guard the place you mean to return to. Hodor did not like it. He said his name so mournfully that it almost became a new word. Bran put his hand on the big man's arm and let the feeling say what words could not. Mira kissed her brother's head and turned away before her face could say anything at all. The river took them. The world became the sound of water against wood and the swish of the boatman's pole as he worked them along by strokes of practiced quiet. The banks slid by, and with them slid the shapes of trees that had learned the posture of listening. The messages in the roots were already gone ahead of them, running faster than any boat, older than any road. Bran felt it like a pulse under everything. He did not know what would answer. He was not naive enough to think only the things he wanted would wake. Rickon lay flat and watched the sky. The wolves lay with their chins on the boat's edge and sniffed as if they could read the history of the water. Osha kept her blade resting across her lap, careless in a way that only people not careless at all could manage. Mira watched the banks. Bran watched everything, as much as one boy in a sledge in a boat could. He watched and he thought, and the thinking was not the narrow kind that counts how many drops fall from the oar. It was the wide kind, the kind that sees trees in winter and men in winter and understands they are not so different when the sap slows. They reached the place the boatman meant for them and stepped from the boat into snow flattened by many feet. The smell of meat met them at once. Sweet and heavy, like a hand pressed over the mouth of a crying child. It made Bran's stomach lurch and then settle, shame and hunger elbowing each other. The great merman had his place on the harbor, and in the glow of fire manderly men moved in the way of fat men who have learned to disguise their speed with the trick of appearing not to hurry. They carried nothing like weapons and made everything into one. "Little wolves," said the steward with the fish eyes and the quick smile that only showed 3 teeth. "Welcome to White Harbor." His gaze flicked over Rickon's face and then to Bran's, and when it came to rest, it did not rest with pity. "You've messages for my lord." "We have a boy," Osha said before Bran could frame something more courtly. "And a name you can put where it belongs. Do you mean to stand by the tales you tell of yourselves to your pig geese? Or do your cooks make stories sweeter than truth too?" The steward's smile did not change. He bowed as if the words had been a courtesy. "If the boy is who I think he is," he said softly, "the truth will be sweeter than any pie. Come de, tea." They followed him under an arch that smelled of frost and smoke and money. And Bran thought of Maester Lewin counting coins and farmers, counting sheep and women, counting children at a hall door, when a feast had been broken by riders. He did not know what would come walking toward them in this warm, fat place. Help or a new kind of hunger. He only knew they had come because the North needed a name it could put its hand on in the dark. He felt the roots under the stones even here, the way the old things traced their fingers through ships and kitchens and cellars. He felt them listening as if a crowd he could not yet see had leaned forward. Rickon walked a half step before him, his hand on Shaggy Dog, the wolf's hackles flat for once. The boy's shoulders were square. He moved the way a promise does, when it has been said in a place where promises are the only coin that buys anything worth having. Bran closed his eyes as they stepped into the heat. He sent one more whisper through the stone. Not a command, not a plan, not a question, only a statement of a thing that had finally been dared. "We are home. We will keep it. Bring us your winter. We will meet it with ours." Okay. Heat gathered at their faces while the snow still clung to boots and the hems of cloaks. A contradiction as old as cities. The steward took them through a passage where salt-stiff nets hung in swags and eels dreamed in tubs, with their mouths barely opening, then up a narrow stair that twisted as if refusing to be found by anyone who did not already belong. The smells were of smoke and fat and pepper, and a sweetness that made Bran's hunger speak rudely in his belly. A kitchen lay beyond, its long table battered into a shine, its ovens breathing hard as beasts. Cooks moved with the grace of men who could work a knife blind. No one looked at the boy with the black wolf directly, which was the surest sign that everyone had seen him. "Through," said the steward in a voice that made an apology of the word. "My lord keeps a private fire." They passed from grease and effort into warmth woven with the hush of good stone. The chamber had been built into the side of the new castle and was half round, its window cut with a view of the harbor's lambent black water. The tapestries were southern in subject, fat-hipped saints and golden halos. And northern in weather, all snow around the edges like frost on a pane. The man who waited in the chamber was fat and still, his hands folded on a mound of belly, as if that were the altar where all vows must be laid. The chair beneath him creaked like an old ship at anchor. His hair was white, where it showed beneath a cap. His jowls a pair of sleepy fishes. He looked like a man who would die of leisure if left alone with a couch and a plate. He looked like a man who had never once been left alone that way. Not when it mattered. "Lord Manderley," the steward said, with the slightest dip. "Guests." Wyman Manderley opened his eyes to their full width, and then to something wider still. He looked at Osha as one looks at a knife. He looked at Mira like a question he recognized, and hoped to be asked properly. He looked at Jojen with polite fear. He looked at Hodor, not at all because Hodor was not there. And then, he looked at Rickon Stark, as if he had spent half his life practicing the movement of it in his mind, and had just now been allowed to try it in truth. "My lord," Osha said before anyone else could shape the lie or the truth into a courtly thing, "this is the boy's house. If you mean harm, we won't begin to speak. If you mean to help, you'll be quick. Your harbor is not your own." "Very little is anyone's own," Wyman murmured, his voice sleepy as cream. "But a man keeps certain corners polished for the day when the right guest steps into them." He levered himself up with two hands on the arms of his chair, and it took a moment, not because his body could not, but because dignity insisted on being consulted. When he stood, he did not so much loom as occupy. "You've brought me winter," he said to Bran, as if it were a personal affront and a blessing in one jar. "And wolves." "Warden," Bran said, and let the word hang for a heartbeat, for Rickon to hear it again in stone. "He keeps what we cannot afford to lose." Wyman's eyes went to Rickon's face and rested there without doing him the discourtesy of searching for Eddard's nose or Catelyn's mouth. "Names are masks and mirrors," he said. "The North wears one with a wolf on it. It does not fit other men." "The North remembers," Mira said, "because sometimes you put the coin down exactly the way the seller expects and watch what he gives in return." Wyman's mouth twitched. "It does. It remembers pies very well." He turned his head without turning his body. "Maester Harold. Bring ink. Bring whatever passes for courage in your chest. We are going to write nothing that can be read by anyone who is not meant to read it." "Yes, sir." A maester drifted in from a door Bran had not seen and bowed until his chain chimed. He was a mild man, with hair like thread pushed through too many needles. He set down ink and paper and sand as if they were relics. "We have watchers," Wyman said conversationally, as if he were remarking upon the weather. "They have names, you know, and names I am willing to say out loud. Only over soup. If you came by river, you were not seen by the people who need to see you. This is both good and a problem." He took a breath that might have been a sigh and might have been the lungs' way of reminding him they were there. "Little lord, do you remember lamprey pie?" Rickon's eyebrows knit. "The kind with the black ugly fish? The cooks told me they fed kings on it, but Hullen said it was pond worms cooked in butter." He glanced at Osha, who had always rewarded plainness. She looked unconvinced by lampreys as a class. Wyman's laugh was more breath than sound. "Your father ate my cook's pie and did not flinch. He ate it as a Stark should, with thanks. Your mother took one bite and smiled in a way that made my cook retire for an afternoon to cry into his apron. It was an honest smile. I have always liked honest smiles better than flattery." He gestured to a deep chair with arms carved as seahorses. "Sit. Not as a guest, as what you say you are." "Warden," Osha murmured, as if reminding a boy that shoes had a left and a right. Rickon sat and set his hand palm down on the carved arm, the way he had set it on stone. His chin came up. Shaggy Dog flopped with the graceless perfection of a creature who knew that comfort was the point of floors. Wyman bowed. It was not light or perfunctory. He bent until his jowls hung like the stockings of a careless lord, and when he straightened the blood had come up in his cheeks. "I have sworn 1,000 oaths," he said to Rickon. "Some were spoken skyward, to gods with 7 faces. Some were whispered at stones with faces carved by men whose bones stone has kept. None felt like this." He put his hand over his breast, and the movement drew attention to the way the cloth had been let out there, and let out again. I am Wyman Manderley. I and mine owe all to the Starks. It is easy to speak that. The mouth has a long memory for comfortable words. This is the hard part. My city is full of eyes that belong to other men. My harbor's mouth speaks with another's tongue. If I raise banners, I lose sons. If I do not, I lose myself. Choose quickly for me. Ben? Bran felt summer press against his mind as if to say wolves do not ask permission to run when they smell blood. He took the feeling and turned it into English. Hide and call, he said. The north is sleeping with one eye open. It will not come to horns and trumpets. It will come to what the old things listen for. We have already sent it. It will arrive as snow arrives. First a few flakes that melt on your glove, then a fall that eats the sound of the world. Then see. Wyman closed his eyes briefly, as if tasting a spice he hadn't ordered but recognized from some long-ago feast. There is a godswood here, he said. Stupid, the Southerners called it. When my grandfather kept it against the judgment of men who wore lace on their sleeves. They called it sentimental. I call it insurance and veneration, and a way to speak a language older than interest. He looked at the maester. Harold, write, Dottie. Write nothing that makes sense unless one were raised under leaves. The maester smiled faintly, a man grateful for the specific demand of craft. His quill bit the page and left a dark sound. Names, Mira said. Say some so we can hear how they sound now. Bear Island, Wyman said without thinking. When I wrote to the little lady there and asked for men, she wrote back that she had a king and his name was Stark. She did not say which one. She did not need to. Lady Mage is away, or dead, or being stubborn beyond the farthest measure. But the Mormonts have a way of being where their oaths are, whether their bodies put a foot there or not. Write to her hall, and to the women who stand in it with axes. Benay, the maester wrote. The mountain clans, Wyman went on. Wolves and Knot and Nori and Little, they do not love me. They do not love any man who looks like he has eaten more than once in a day. But they love the Starks, and they are happier to cut throats for a promise than for coin. Write, and write to the Flints, both kinds. On the fingers and in the mountains, Bran said, nodding. The Riverlands had 3 sorts of flints. The North had 2. He had listened as a boy, and he found that all that listening had not been a waste of small hours. The Umbers, Wyman said, and his mouth made a grimace as if it had bitten a sour cherry. The Great John is a guest of men who cannot let a feast pass without a knife in it. Crowfood sits hard and pretends to be soft. He could go either way. Right, offer him meat he can tear with his teeth and a name he can roar. He likes both. Cahold, Mira suggested. What is left of the Karstarks will follow a winter wind if it blows from the right direction. Write to them, and tell them the wind is a wolf's breath, Wyman said. Tell them they can die on good terms with themselves at last. Tell them the boy's hand was on a stone. They will understand that as well as any prayer. White Harbor's own, Osha said quietly. You have men who would come to a whistle if you blew it under the right eaves. Wyman's eyelids lowered until his eyes were dangerous, which on his face made them delicate. I do. They once kept watch in the wolf's den, when the den was a place for justice and fear in equal measure. Wolves in livery. Wolves in rags. Wolves with the law. We called them the Wolf Pack, because fat men like to make jests to disguise their work. We will call them again. He looked at the maester. Call them to the old place with a story. A story travels safer than a horn. The maester wrote, and the sound of it was like rain running down gutters. Wyman clapped his hands softly together, a sound with no more force than snow falling off a branch, and servants appeared with bowls and meat and the famous pies. The lampreys shone like snakes drowned in butter. Bran took a slice because he was a Stark in a rich man's hall, and that had always meant being equal to whatever plate was set before you. Rickon took 2 slices because Shaggy Dog had put his chin on the table and made a low, pathetic rumble that reminded everyone he had teeth as well as emotions. We cannot show the boy's face to my city, Wyman said, with his mouth full of something that would have killed a lesser man's heart. Not yet. The Freys have eyes like knives, and the Boltons sniff like dogs. But there is more than one white harbor. There is a city above and a city below. The one above has guards in chain and banners to please the south, and a sept where we pretend to care what 7 men think. The one below has tunnels where river water learns to be quiet, and cookshops where the men who make bread talk to each other with their hands in dough, and doorways that have never seen sunlight and yet are warmer than the halls I keep for kings. We will pass him under the stone the way rivers pass under bridges. He will come to the wolf's den by night and hear men make their vows where no Frey would set his perfumed foot. Bah! Winterfell, Rickon said, as if to make sure the place they had left had not been an accident. We're going back. We are, Bran said. You will go home by a road that goes through other men's houses. We will ask them to travel with you on the last part. My cook will be offended that you are not staying to eat his courage in the shape of a second pie, Wyman said mildly. But I will explain to him that sometimes bravery looks like leaving a table. He leaned forward, and the movement brought him as close to nimble as he ever would be. Would you like to see something? He did not wait for their answer. He lifted a ring of keys from a hook on the wall and waddled to a door that any other man would have called a cupboard. Behind the door was a stair made for slim men who do not think about stairs. Wyman made himself a story about how it amused him to descend, and descended. They followed, the wolves placing each paw deliberately, as if the place had teeth. The wolf's den had been the Stark stronghold when the world was younger, and the White Knife, a rougher creature. It had been a prison and a courthouse, and sometimes, in winters when justice had to travel with a club, a gallows. Now it was half show and half secret. Wyman lit a lantern, and the walls showed their age the way old men show their scars when they are tired of being polite about their past. Sewing patterns carved by bored jailers lay beside tally marks that ran for yards. Names lay one on another, as if letters could make a bed. Here, Wyman said, and set the lantern down where a face had been carved that looked like a man who had wolfed a man whole and been proud of the burp. This is where I talk to my city, when I wish it to speak with my voice, and not with the ones I have to feed by day. This is where the poor and the clever and the dangerous listen. He turned to Rickon. Speak, Warden. Not as a lord, not as a supplicant. As a boy whose house burned and who has wolves. Rickon stood there with Shaggy Dog leaning on his hip and did not look at Bran. That pleased Bran in a way that made him feel older than he had any right to feel. I am Rickon Stark, the boy said, the words coming out like stones put down on a table. This is my brother Bran. Our father was Eddard Stark, and he was good. Men burned our house. Men ate bread with our brother and cut him instead. We ran. We came back. I am going to keep the North. I am going to keep your children warm. I am going to keep your boats safe. I am going to keep your knives from your neighbor's ribs if your neighbor is hungry. He hesitated. It was not fear. He was feeling for a word. If you want to keep with me, then keep. If not, go where the Freys eat. The lantern flared at that moment, as if it had heard a thing it had been made to hear. Wyman's mouth did a small, surprised thing. Courage, he said. So softly, it might have been only to himself. Then, louder, Maester Tawt, write no more. Go upstairs and forget the ink until I call for it. Steward. He looked around, realized the steward had the sense to be not there, and nodded once. Satisfied. We will make our call now. He lifted the lantern and tilted it so its light struck a pattern on the arch above the old gate, where carvings no one bothered to look at by day looked back at night. He took a breath and bellowed. The sound that came out of him was not fat. It was not polite. It was a ship's horn in a fog, a long layered sound that found corners and made them confess they were corners. The wolves flinched, then set their paws wider. Rickon's chin came up. Osha's hand went to her knife and then to the boy's shoulder. From below and above, and through stones, men came. They slid out of doorways and from cracks in the wall that could not possibly be man-sized, and yet were. Some wore bits of livery under their rags, not manderly blue and white but colors scrubbed to neutral. Some wore the smell of fish, and others of tallow, and others of a thing like anger, baked into flour. A few wore good steel openly and indifference in their faces. All of them had the careful walk of men who had learned not to knock their shoulders into the world where it might knock back louder. "This," Wyman said to Rickon without moving his mouth, "is an old pack. Sometimes they break and bite each other. So does winter." The men and a handful of hard-faced women arranged themselves without being told exactly how. The old habits of the den had not died. They had only learned new jobs. Wyman set the lantern on the floor and spread his hands like a fat priest, blessing bread. "You are here because you listen," he said. "If you did not, you would be burying your sons for tax money by now. You may yet. I have a story for you. I have a face for you to see in the dark, if you choose to keep it." He stepped aside not like a lord avoiding a puddle, but like a stagehand making way for the act that mattered. The lantern threw Rickon's shadow up until the boy looked like a man. Shaggy Dog's ears made the shadow look crowned. Bran felt the hairs on his arms stand as if touched by cold and music both. "Say your name," Wyman said. "Rickon Stark," he said again. And this time, the stone said it with him. "Warden of the North." He didn't add yours. He had learned something in a god's wood. The first to kneel was a woman with a baker's arms. Then a man with a scar that ran from mouth to chin, as if someone had once tried to peel his face down and failed. Then a girl with a sailor's step. Then two boys who might have made a single good-sized boy between them. Then a graybeard with the air of a captain who had been demoted by the sea itself. They went down as if their knees remembered a habit they had been meaning to take up again. "The den is yours," said the graybeard. "White Harbor is yours." He did not say "my lord." He did not need to. Wyman watched them with a face that made his fat an armor, not a joke. "We begin in cellars," he said, satisfied. "The world ends there, or starts there." The work flowed out from that hour like water decanted through channels men had carved when the city was young. By dusk, a woman was walking a basket of bread down a particular lane in the fish market. That meant a boy in a blue cap would walk another way. That meant a man with a wooden leg would knock on a door whose knocker had a wolf for a tongue. By midnight, a fisherman had tied a strip of old blue into his net. By dawn, his brother's woman had put that strip under a stone on the old merman's steps where only children ever looked. By noon of the second day, a small boy no one noticed was sitting on the quay, swinging his legs while three ships' captains learned what the den had learned the night before. None of these acts had meaning on their own. Together, they made the shape of a throat clearing. And in the God's Wood of Newcastle, under a small stubborn weirwood that had not grown tall, because the city would not let it grow, Bran spoke again into the sap and let the wood carry it along tunnels, cut by water and worm and time. "Winterfell," he sent. "Watch. Den. White Harbor. Wolf's Den. We are counting." Osha moved through the city with Osha's old gift, being where a knife was before the knife thought of it. Mira went twice to the quay where men looked south and sneered, then west and grew quiet. Jojen did not leave his pallet more than he had to. The fever took him sometimes like a friend who had stayed too long and refused to see he was not wanted. When it left, Jojen's eyes were deeper. "It is happening the way it must," he told Bran. And Bran did not ask him who had said it must be so. He had learned that necessity, when understood, sounds like prophecy. 3 days into the work of calling, a man in fine cloth with a nervous laugh and a purse too heavy at his belt followed Mira from a pie shop, and then stopped following when Osha turned right instead of left in a lane that ended in nowhere. He was polite when he died. He was quieter after. Wyman's men took away what could not be left for the drains. "Do not make a habit," Wyman warned, not looking at Osha when he said it, and thereby allowing her to agree without becoming beholden. She shrugged and oiled her knife. "Letters," Maester Harold said one morning, carrying a bundle with a care that made it plain his person would not be so carefully carried if he were to fall. "Some written upon leaves. I have not seen such a thing. I hesitate to call it writing. The leaves were birch and rowan and beech, tough and pale, pricked with small holes that, if one knew what holes to count, were names and directions. Children had carried most of them. No one stops a child who looks like he has business. One had been delivered by a crow that refused to be walked to the rookery, sat upon Wyman's chair, and defecated there with a deliberation Bran found charming. "This one," Harold said, holding a strip of bark to the light as if the letters might swim into place if warmed. "From Bear Island." Bran touched the bark with one finger, and under the skin of the thing the smell of salt and pine and wet dog rose, and the letters made sense because the thing they were nailed to made sense. He watched them rearrange into words in his mind. He read aloud because he liked the sound in the hall. The way it added a layer of truth. "The Mormonts have more axes than bread," he said. "We would not trade the axes for bread because you cannot cut a throat with a loaf. Send us a Stark, and we will bring our axes and take bread." "Ben." Wyman smiled in a way that made him look less like a fish and more like a man who had seen a joke land well. "You will have a Stark," he said, mostly to himself. "That bark," Mira said, reaching to take it, "was chewed." A child tied it off with gut. She turned it over. A girl's hand wrote the marks, and her fingers were cold. She does not want anyone to notice. Her letters pretend to be a boy's. "Lyanna Mormont," Wyman said, in the tone of a man reciting a favorite recipe. Her mother named her in a way that men with songs respect. She writes letters the way men swing swords. She will be trouble for someone one day. We should encourage her to be trouble for the right ones. Other messages were less explicit, but clearly shaped. The mountain clans made their ascent look like disdain, which on their tongues tasted like friendship. A piece of sandstone with 3 small cuts came from the rills. Bran did not know how to read it until he closed his fist around the stone and felt water having its way with land. It said, in the antiques of rivers, "We will come the way we always have, and the way we always have is by paths that men do not put on maps." A strip of leather came from Carhold, stained brown and still smelling faintly of a horse's back. The holes in it made a song when held to ear and turned slowly. It sang of wanting forgiveness and a chance to die for something that would make wives and daughters speak a man's name without spitting. "The Umbers?" Osha asked, cutting dried venison into strips by sliding her knife away from her thumb with a rhythm that made even the maester look away. "A great handprint in soot on a piece of linen," Wyman said dryly. "That is their usual manner of correspondence." Bran closed his eyes. His hand ached to match that print. It was not only Great John who had hands like meat hooks. There were a dozen Umbers whose palms could have made a good signature for a house. "He will come if he can fight someone he hates on the way," he said. "Make sure there is such a person between him and us." "Freys," Wyman said, as if noting an item already on the list. "Freys hire themselves out to their own grievances. There is never a lack of them." "No." The first Freys to die for the sake of the wardenship of the North died without knowing the name of the boy for whom their blood watered Old Stone. They died in a cellar that had once been used to pickle fish. They died with their mouths full of the rich oil that slicks eels and the prejudice that slicks fools. It was nothing grand. It was very neat. When it was done, Wyman sighed and sent for more barrels, and told his steward he would need stronger men for kitchen work for a few days. The steward bowed and did not ask why the cooks were whistling funeral songs. The city noticed. The city's bottom teeth bit a little harder into its top lip and kept talking as if nothing had happened. That is how cities agree to things. Rickon's days had shape. In the mornings, Osha put him at the table with Maester Harold and made him learn the numbers she had once claimed to despise. "Men steal in columns," she told him. "They will swear by all gods they did not, and then the sums glare at them like cats and make a liar of their oath." He learned to count boats and bread and blades. He learned that Wyman bled his guards into his granaries by the simple trick of paying them in flour part of the time. He learned that the cost of lamprey went up when priests came to town because priests eat as much as men who sail. He learned that a promise meant 10 carts overloaded or 12 carts properly loaded, and only a fool asked for the first and then was shocked at the broken axles. In the afternoons, Mira taught him to throw and judge wind and circle water. She made him stand in the wolf's den with his eyes closed and told him to listen for a rat moving against stone in another room. "Your job is eyes and ears," she said, tapping his temple with the butt of her spear. "Not only teeth." At night, Bran took him into the godswood and let him put his palm on the bark, the way he had touched the stone. The first time, Rickon jerked his hand away with a face that said he had been bitten by a polite dog. The second time he kept his hand against the smooth-cut face until his fingertips went numb and then warm. "I do not hear words," he said, frustrated. "I hear my head being silly." "You hear what is there," Bran said. "If you want words, speak some." "Which?" Rickon demanded. "The ones you want to hear," Bran said, smiling. "I used to ask the tree where Robb would ride and what Mother would say when she reached the end of her patience with me. Now I say what I will do, and the tree remembers it for me. And if I think of changing my mind, it looks at me with a wooden expression until I am ashamed." Rickon laughed at that in the muffled way of boys who have not decided if laughing is an admission of weakness. "I will keep the North like a dog keeps a bone," he told the weirwood. "And if a Frey tries to take it from me, I will bite his fingers. If a Bolton tries, I will take the whole hand." "That will do," Bran said, and felt the sap accepted like a coin pushed under a door. The answer to their calling came from strange places and obvious ones, and always slower than their hearts demanded and faster than fear would have predicted. 2 riders arrived from the hills with their faces painted the way Norries paint their faces when they mean to pretend to be stones. They were silent at the gate, then spoke at the den as if taking a language back out of their mouths. "We heard," said the elder, who might have been 30 or a dried 45. "We remembered. The winter of wolves is better than the winter of flaying. Tell the boy he will not be alone in the snow." A girl no older than 10 came down the river on a raft of ice, leaping from floe to floe with the nimbleness of someone who had learned to swim before she knew there were people who did not like water. She had an axe jauntily tied across her back, and she swung it off to present it like a gift to Rickon. "For the Warden," she said. "My aunt said to tell you that we do not know a Bolton and have never heard of a Frey, and will not put our axes down for a Lannister, unless it is to sharpen them." "Lyanna," Wyman murmured, his face doing that happy thing again. "Tell your aunt," he told the child formally, "that she is my queen, all things except cooking. She would rather be your captain," the girl said, untroubled, and left with an eel pie she did not thank anyone for. From the rills there came a man with scars, so intricate, he looked as if someone had once attempted to carve him into someone else by hand. "Lady Barbary sends her good wishes," he said, each word held as if it had more heat than his mouth could safely carry. "She says she will not speak names where ears are rented, but if a certain boy is in a certain place, she will bring certain things to Winterfell when the snows allow." "Barbary Dustin," Osha said later, when the man had gone into the city like anyone else going in to do business with a man who sold nails. "She hates as cleanly as most people love. That sort of woman can be turned into a friend by handing her the right enemy. We have such enemies in cartloads," Wyman observed. "We will sort them for her by weight." Bran let this part of the world collect in his chest and pressed it down through his hands into stone. The crypt at Winterfell answered now like a drum with a thick skin. When he sent a message to Hodor, he felt Hodor's pleasure meet it head-on like a dog bounding to the door at the sound of boots. Hodor came back to him in echoes that sounded like the North pronouncing its own name. Jojen's health flickered and steadied in the signal, like a candle's edge trued by a hand cupped around it. On the 6th day, Wyman brought him into a room he had never seen, one without windows, under everything, where the air felt older than coin. The walls had been polished by generations of men putting their shoulders to them when they were in trouble. There were marks on the floor where tables had stood for weddings, and there were stains on the walls that might have been wine. "My city's oldest room," Wyman said, laying his hand against the stone with the familiarity of a man touching his wife's cheek in public, without shame. "They signed and hanged here, feasted and drowned, hid and were found. I brought kings in here when the world was young because everything important looks better in bad light." He breathed out. "We will bring not kings here now." "Not kings," Bran said, liking the shape of the word. "Wardens." "Wardens," Wyman agreed, and there was reverence in his tone. That night, the phrase announced a levy on beer and a levy on breath. They didn't call the second one that, but the money would have come to the same. Wyman paid it and smiled, and his smile told them he would be very fat in hell and would make a throne of their bones. Then he sent the den out with rumor as their sword. It took 2 days for every corner of White Harbor to know that the phrase had cut the throat of a man for failing to scrape his boots properly on their steps. It did not matter whether it was true. It was true enough of men who would request 9 different sauces at a war council and have 9 different men whipped for failing to guess which sauce should have been brought first. When the pack is hungry, you do not need to put meat in its mouth. It will go look for it. On the 7th day, a rider came in lathered from the east with a Bolton knot at his shoulder and a flayed man on his breast. He was young enough to still enjoy the sight of his own badge. He demanded Wyman's presence in the market square, and Wyman gave it to him after the measure of a pie. The man announced that Ramsay Snow, now Ramsay Bolton, by the kindness of a king who had never seen the North in winter, would come to inspect White Harbor's loyalty. He would come with phrase. He would come with a banner that had never been loved. He would come with a hunger for fear. "Of course," Wyman said, and dabbed his lips with a napkin kept by servants who had seen every pretense men enjoyed. "We will feed him." He came in the white stink of a day that had been snow and then turned to ice. Phrase dribbled around him like gravy around meat, too lean to deserve it. The banners looked sick. The horses looked resentful. Ramsay smiled as one who had never sincerely meant it. He had a pretty cloak someone had flayed off someone whose skin had been unworthy of being skin, and he had a habit of looking at women as if choosing where to put a word or a knife next. He made Wyman bend and kiss a ring. Wyman's mouth touched iron and came away tasteless. The city watched. Bran watched through men's eyes and birds and a cat's that had ruined its tail crossing too close to a wharf chain. He watched from the Godswood where the weirwood at Newcastle tightened its face. He watched from the den's cracks where the men who listened made their listening look like idleness. He watched from Summer, who had been left in the temple of Wyman's kitchens, with a vast pot of bones, while Osha walked beside Rickon through tunnels, where people were careful not to be where they were. Ramsay did not find a boy. He found the outer layer of a city that had decided to be comical. He found food and warmth, and a lord who could not possibly choose his own shoes without assistance. He found deference in the upper streets and blankness in the lower ones. He found nothing to hurt that would bleed and cry loudly enough to make him happy in the way he liked to be happy. He made do. Men always do when their appetites can't be properly served. He took 3 women to his bed and sent 2 away with bruises and 1 to the river. He ordered a baker whipped, and the baker took it with the silence of a man who had been promised more interesting pain later. He rode out when the stable boys had groomed the frost into his horse's mane to make a little crown of it. He spat at the merman, and the spittle froze before it hit stone and looked like a pearl. Wyman bowed and bowed until his spine was a story about obedience. "Your city smells of meat and secrets," Ramsay said. "Reins loose, smile tight. One of those things will fatten a man more than it should. One of those things kills him in the end." "Both," Wyman said without blinking, and Ramsay laughed because he thought it was a jest. When they were gone, when the last phrase horse had slipped a hoof on a cobble and almost broken its own leg, Wyman sent for them in a voice that made the maester arrive with ink and the steward with keys. "He will go to Winterfell," Wyman said. "He will make the hall smell like things the hall should never smell like. There will be a wedding." The Freys have never liked a celebration they weren't allowed to kill. "We will go too. We will bring men. We will bring songs. We will bring pies." He looked at Rickon then, full and unafraid. "We will bring you." Osha's breath went out through her nose in a warning. Bran held up a hand and quieted no one but the air. "No," he said. "Not yet. He is a story we tell by darkness, while other men are busy lighting candles. The den will know him. The den will carry him. Winterfell will learn him when the first wolves begin to run where they have not run in years." "Nain." Wyman nodded, relieved and disappointed in measured halves. "The old laws will be wrapped around new things," he said. "I can still put 1 foot and then another down on the long ways of oath and bread. It is good to be given a chance. Men like to be brave after dessert. I will make sure dessert is sweet." Messages went out then, not only in bark and stones and the hush of roots, but in more usual forms. pliant to prying eyes but not to prying hearts. Sir, this was told that, and master that heard this. The den carried whispers like men carrying water sloshing in buckets one over full step from a spill. The mountain clans moved downward in the snow with the purpose of water. Bear Island's longboats combed the coast for fish and men and stories that would not drown. A woman who had been a spearwife, and then a wife, and then only herself hung blankets, the way certain fishermen hung nets at certain times of day. And the sight changed a corner of White Harbor into a place where one met a runner from Oldcastle, who had not expected to run for anyone but the cold. Bran slept very little. When he closed his eyes, the trees came to him. Not in the overwhelming wave that had once thrown him gasping into hallways of red light and webs of white roots, but in the measured way of kin who speak between chores. He spoke back. He set names into bark and let them sink the way green dyes sink into old cloth. He set intentions into sap and did not flinch when he felt the trees weighing them. He did not ask for victory. He asked for clarity, like a boy asking for a clean window to look out of even when what lay beyond the glass was winter. The gods had their own appetites. He would not feed them lies to make friends of them. Friends like that eat you later. On the 9th day, when the harbor ice cracked like old bones, and the gulls came down in a flurry as if someone had thrown a thought up into the sky, and they wanted to peck it apart. A man in sealskin and iron came to the den with salt still crystallized in his beard. He was from the Lonely Light or Black Tide or some other place where men marry their daughters to waves. It did not matter. The drowned, he said, not caring to finish the god's name, did not keep the north when they tried. There are ironmen who remember you not like an enemy, but like a story where they were beaten honestly. They prefer honesty to hunger. If you want the sea to speak for you, send something that floats. If you want us to fight for you, give us leave to drown a fray or two. Bender. Permission, Wyman said gravely, and gestured as if signing a writ. Granted. And there were the Risewells, or at least a cousin of them, stooping to enter where honest men stoop, because pride bows to necessity if life is stubborn. There were hillmen who took bread and ate it in the hall, and then returned the bread in the shape of information. There was a hunter who had once sold venison to a Bolton, and kept the smell of fear in his hair long enough to follow it back to a camp, where 10 men had a flag, and 2 had shoes. He showed Osha how to find that camp by stepping where snow looked most innocent. Day. She returned a day later with a cut on her cheek and a grin like a lesson. They are watching the river road, she said. They will tire. We can tire them faster. Doe, Wyman said. Do not be clever in a way men can see. Be clever in the way bread rises. Winterfell was not empty while they did all this. Hodor kept the crypts the way a good man keeps a graveyard, with respect and a broom. He talked to the stone, and the stone tolerated him, and liked him more for not asking it to be a person. Jojen slept, and woke, and slept, and woke, and began to look less like a candle, and more like a boy who has been allowed to put his head down for an hour, in a place where his sister watches his back. He sent Bran 3 words through the stone. Hurry if slow. Bran smiled at the paradox and obeyed both halves. He did not ring the moment for events faster than it would give them. He did not waste it by forgetting that moment's end. On the 10th day, a man in furs so good they would have made 10 thinner men warmer, stood in the den, and spoke in a voice like a wall. Small John died, he said. Not as news but as a weather report. Great John is gone. Horsebane quarrels with Crowfoot because they are brothers, and because the world is made so that brothers quarrel when what they want is the same thing. He looked at Rickon. Now we know what it is we want. We'll quarrel about how to get it, but we'll walk toward it while we quarrel. And what is it? Rickon asked. It was not a challenge. It was a request for the right naming of a thing. You, said the man, and he did not kneel, and Rickon did not ask him to. But not you alone. You in a hall that does not stink of men who peel other men. You with a tree. You with a man beside you who says no when your yes is foolish. That last, Osha said, pleased. That last is very wise. Bran took his brother after that into the harbor in a hood, and a cloak thin enough to be anyone's. They sat on an upturned boat where Tar had been let fatten in the sun, and watched men fix the ribs of another craft with patience and songs that had no words. "I could throw a stone," Rickon said, "because boys measure all the dimensions of their world that way, secretly. I could throw it and make a sound, and the sound would go. Or the stone would go. Either way, it would go." "Do not waste it," Bran said, hearing Lewin in his own voice, and wanting to laugh and nod and weep all at once. "We will need the stones and the sounds. Keep your arm fresh. Keep your words better." "Men know." A man sitting near them on a net hummed and spat, and said to no one in particular, "Hey." It took 11 days for the first group, larger than a handful, to arrive. 30 men with axes, and 10 with bows, and a woman, with a chest like a shield, and a mind like a tally sheet. They had come down out of the forests where the ice made cathedrals, and the deer preyed by starving. They had not come in a line. They had come like leaves that meet in an eddy. They were called Norries and Wolves and Mountain Flints and Littles, until their names ceased to matter, and only the shape of their hunger mattered. White Harbor noticed and did not notice them. The Den noticed and gave them a place to sleep, and a way to keep their hands from each other's throats. Wyman noticed and sent meat. Bran noticed and felt something in his chest unclench. "No?" Rickon asked that night, knowing the answer and asking anyway, because sometimes boys need to hear the thing twice so they can sleep soundly on it. "Soon," Bran said. The Manderley banners came out on the 12th day, and were carried through the streets for the first time in too long with the correct notes in the trumpets. Men cursed, and children laughed, and women rolled their eyes and then smiled, because smiling is also a weapon. Wyman put on his best cloak and his most complacent mouth, and rode through his city, as if he had gained 30 stone of loyalty overnight. Behind him, among his guards, marched men who had never thought to wear a lord's colors. They did not look comfortable. Comfort was never required of men who mean to win. On the 13th day, the sea sent a gift. A half-wrecked Frey boat that had come limping up the river, with no Frey on it, and 2 ironmen pretending not to exist. "We found it floating like a lie," they said bluntly, and handed the prow over to Wyman, who took it like an oath. "We do not love you," they added to Bran and Rickon, "because ironmen do not say such things. But we love the men your enemies are. That is enough for now." "Enough," Bran agreed. He had learned to respect half measures when they were made by men who did not know what whole measures were. On the 14th day, the messenger from the Dreadfort arrived with teeth picked clean by wind. He carried Ramsay's demand for meat, men, and a kind of attention only cowards give. Wyman fed the man. He gave him a message back that would read, to a man who did not know how to hear well, like agreement. The Den watched the messenger's horse pick its way over old fish spines at the edge of the quay, and placed small wagers on whether the animal would stumble. None of the wagers were collected. It was too late in the day to think about such things as individual luck. "Tonight," Wyman said in the room beneath the city, with the Den gathered again, and Bran's hand on Stone and Rickon's hand on Shaggy Dog. "We go tonight. We go out the river mouth with boats no one would search because no one of worth would use them. We go with men who know how to row, and then walk, and then row again. We go with food because men fight better when their bellies don't hurt. We go with songs because men fight better when they can make jokes later about how poorly they sang." He paused and looked at the boy as if seeing 2 of him at once. "The child and the winter. You do not go. You go farther when the time is right." "Then..." Rickon's mouth opened and closed. He swallowed his pride whole, and it lodged in his throat and stayed. "All right," he said, and the room recognized that all right as the kind of consent that makes men want to obey the boy who gave it. Osha put her hand on his head and smudged his hair like a benediction. Only the rough know how to give without ruining the moment. "Good," she said. "You'll have a longer life for it, which is a thing I would like to see happen." They went that night under a sky like iron, the river skinning itself into ice, and then deciding not to quite yet. The lanterns on the boats were covered until they became midnight fruit. The men did not speak, except in the language of oars and cords and caution. Bran sat wrapped and hooded, a bundle of thoughts, and let summer's senses map the banks in deep shadow where men moved with bad intention. He warned where he could. "Osha, and 2 den men with the look of netmenders and the hands of men who had killed with kindness took care of the rest. They slipped the mouth and hugged the coast where the sea told secrets to rock. And then they cut across a bay that had once been a whale's mind. They came to a place where men who owed Wyman too much for any man's comfort waited with torches so small they were not torches. And in the morning they finished the journey by foot, treading a path between snowdrifts that had been shaped by wind and a kind of agreement among trees to let this pass go bare. Bran felt it ahead of them. The old way up to Winterfell that only men who had walked it often remembered when snow decided to pretend it did not exist. They saw Winterfell at dusk, its broken teeth black against a bruised sky, and the men from the den inhaled, which was the nearest thing to a cheer those men could give a ruin. Home, one said, surprised. It was not his home at all. Hodor stood in the yard as if he had grown there and had never moved. He had a broom in one hand and a cudgel in the other. He said his name like it was an oath, and wept openly, and did not stop sweeping as he wept. Jojen came out and nodded once, as if the thing that had been growing in the air had finally taken on bark. He coughed and smiled and put his hand on the stone that covered Eddard Stark's bones, and said nothing. They did not light big fires. They lit many small ones. Men moved into corners and found places where walls still had opinions. Wyman stood in the broken shadow of the great hall, and adjusted his cloak around his hearty shoulders, and wept once, quickly, like a cook who has spilled milk, and remembered too late that the milk belonged to a child. Then he sent men to set posts, and men to set boards, and men to set bowls. The first thing we do in a hall, he said, is make the smell of food. Then we make the smell of soap. Then we make the smell of iron. Then, when the enemy comes, the hall will smell like itself, and be ashamed to let Menace make more perfume. Then, thou. Bran went to the Godswood, where the heart tree's face had seen fire and smoke and not flinched. He put his hand on it, and let the cold of the bark tell him he was present. Rickon stood beside him, and gave the tree a glance one gives a serious teacher, impatient and reverent together. This is ours, Rickon whispered. If they come, we'll make them learn whose. They will come, Bran said. Good. Let them bring their names with them. Banderwall. The first messenger to come under a flag that was not a Frey or Bolton came at noon the next day. A woman in mail that had been cared for by hands that knew the oil and the moment and the nail to lift to check for rust. She carried no banner. She carried a bag with a fishbone sewn to it. From the rills, she said. From people who compromise well and forgive badly. They ask who holds the keys. Warden, Wyman said, turning to Rickon. Rickon blinked. He put his hand in his pocket and looked foolish for one moment, which the room recognized and loved him for. Then he lifted it empty and made a key shape in the air with his fingers and turned it. We do, he said. The woman nodded and smiled and turned to go. We will come by night, she said, and her voice carried the weight of 10 other men's certainty. We would rather look like shadows to ourselves than banners to them. That night, the first of the mountain men arrived in numbers. They came with their faces painted and their feet hard, and they stood under the broken portcullis and hissed at the cold as if it were a thing you could shame into leaving. They declared themselves not to Wyman but to the boy. We will not take orders from fat men, one said cheerfully to Wyman's face. Wyman clapped him on the shoulder and told him to take a second bowl of stew in that case, since he could not be expected to fight on a stomach empty of both meat and affection. The man laughed and took it, and shoved it into his face with the manners of an honored guest. On the 3rd day after their return, Bran woke in the night to a feeling that did not belong to wolves or men or trees. It was a pressure that could have been weather if weather had a will. He slid into summer with the ease now of a man putting on a familiar glove and loped the west wall. In the sour blankness beyond the broken tower, he smelled iron and bad breath. In the frostbitten bracken, he smelled men who had never considered that the land could be as clever as they were. He saw the tiny glint that is a knife pretending not to be a star. He sent the thought to Osha before his human body had turned in the bed. Osha was moving already. She did not need to be told twice about the world. She took 2 den men and 1 mountain man, with a face designed for ending discussions, and went into the dark. A quarter of an hour later, she returned with 3 bodies and a notion. "They are testing," she said. "They are prying the hall to see where it groans. They will find places and pry there again. We will smash their fingers." "Quietly," Wyman said. Osha rolled her eyes. She had never met a fat man who was not obsessed with quiet. "Ace lambs," she promised. Pigeons went out by day to houses that had never kept pigeons and flew like unimportant things. Children went out by dusk to feed dogs and cats in corners that had never known the feel of meat. A woman who had always hated dogs taught one to howl if it heard a certain whistle at a certain hour. Rickon watched the making of these small weapons and absorbed the lesson. That the war was to be won not in the moment when banners met, but in 100,000 approvals the world would give if asked in the right tone. On the 7th day after that, when the moon had gone paper thin, a rider wearing no color arrived at the head of a train of carts that smelled like remembrance and work. He had hands like boulders and a voice like wind on a plain. He wore his beard like a badge. "We heard," he said. "We came. Don't waste our feet. Where do you want us?" "In the kitchens at first," Wyman said, entirely sincere. "Then on the walls. Then in the places where the walls forgot they were walls." The man grinned with every tooth he had left. "Who says this boy is the boy he is?" he asked, testing for the metal in the coin. Rickon did not wait for Bran to answer for him. He picked up the wooden trencher by his hand and held it like a shield and a promise. "The stone," he said. "The tree. My brother. The den. The women who stir your stew. Pick one if you don't have time for all." The man laughed and bowed his big head as if practicing for a time he would need to do it before a lady. "Good," he said. "We'll do what we can with him. If he sours, we'll add honey. If he grows soft, we'll put a stone in his pocket." It began then to truly begin. The keep's silence changed its nature from hollow to poised. The hall's smells learned to layer like stories. Smoke and meat and leather, tallow and iron, and the faint sweetness of clean straw. Men laughed again. Not as men laugh in longhouses where excess is a sport, but the laughter of people surprised by the warmth of their own mouths. Women argued with Wyman's stewards about stores, and won some of those arguments, and lost others, and went away satisfied both ways. Hodor carried 3 men on his back for the sport of it, and then a child for the joy of it, and then a beam because it needed carrying. He said his name to each object as if introducing himself to a new friend. Bran kept to the god's wood as much as decency allowed a boy among men who had not forged their respect for him yet. He did not thrust himself on their attention like a story eager to be heard. He spoke to the tree, and the tree listened with that faint narrowing of white wooden eyes that meant it understood as well as it needed to. He sent out the steady pulse of a heart that means to keep you alive, not to impress you. In his sleep he saw the river whispering to itself around White Harbor, and the sea nodding as if to say, "Hurry," and the hill clans making up songs so that when they had to die, they would be able to do it to a tune. He saw Bear Island's girls honing blades and talking to each other about what sort of wolf a boy with that mouth might be. He saw Ramsay smiling and learned nothing he did not already know about men who mistake the nervous motion of their eyes for cleverness. On the 9th day of that second fortnight, when the clouds had decided to behave themselves and lie down in proper low sheets, a thin man with a high laugh and boots too fine for the north arrived, in a cloak of gray with a talent for saying nothing with dignity. "The king in the south," he announced at the gate, "sends warm wishes to the warden of the north." Bran and Wyman and Osha convened in the ruins of the great hall, under a roof that was part sky. Rickon came because he was the warden, and because Osha wanted him to see how men looked when they were used to making people smaller by standing near them. The thin man dismounted with a gesture that had taken practice. He bowed to Wyman precisely deep enough to be insulting. He turned to Rickon and let confusion wrinkle his smooth forehead. "And who is this brave man?" Wyman smiled and did not show teeth. "A boy who will one day be asked to allow you to keep your tongue," he said cheerfully. "You are far from your soup." The thin man did not betray fear. He had eaten better meals than fear. "The Iron Throne expects." "The Iron Throne expects many things," Wyman said. "It will be happier if it can learn to accept a few." The thin man's smile drooped. "Our good Lord Bolton has been promised." "Promises are a soup best eaten hot," Wyman said pleasantly. "They congeal." The thin man's gaze went to the broken walls. The men moving like schoolboys putting a haul back after a prank. The wolves lying like moralities. It returned to Rickon, then to Bran, sticking for a moment on the chair. Bran used as if the difference between a sledge and a throne might be a point of law. "Names," he said, suddenly almost polite. "I would write them." "Write this one," said Osha, stepping forward so he had to lean back to keep his nose clear of her knife's worn yet eager point. "Rickon Stark, Warden of the North." "And this," Bran said, because he knew there was power in names spoken into air where other men could hear. "Wyman Manderley, who keeps to his oaths the way fat men keep to dinners." "Osha, Mira Re. Eugen Re. He paused, feeling the shape of a word that would be a man in a different season. "And Summer. And Hodor." Hodor said because he was tired of being left out of lists. "And Hodor," Bran agreed gravely. The thin man wrote, his hand neat, the letters like little men marching left to right as if they could escape the fact of where they were by heading south across a page. He put his paper away in a case lined with leather softer than most men's feelings. He made a bow that was neither more nor less insulting than the last and left with as much dignity as the road would allow. "Let him go far enough to feel safe," Osha advised. "Then let a tree fall on him." "No," Wyman said. "Practical in the way men with cooks are practical. Let him go far enough to be seen going by the people who need to see him go. Then let a rumor trip him and make him late to the next place he means to carry his bad news. If he dies, someone worse will come and be more careful." Osha shrugged. "That works too." Time behaved oddly for a while after that. It went forward in right ways. Bread rose, wounds closed, messages arrived and were answered. And yet the air felt like air before a storm, waiting to justify itself by violence. Men and women grown thin by winters of worry, waited with their hands busy and their hearts in their throats. The wolves learned the wall's broken teeth. The den learned the steps in the crypt by heart, so that if they had to die there, they would not trip and make an ugly sound. Wyman's laughter in the hall grew louder, and then softer, and then louder again, as if calibrating itself to the moment when it would have to be a weapon and not a comfort. On a night when the moon was fat and unashamed, Bran woke with his mouth open to snow and the sound of something more than snow moving under it. He sat up and reached with his mind down through the roots and into the stone and along the paths men had worn until the paths remembered them. He found the movement. He found men with flaming torches in their throats and flayed men on their minds. He found a horn ready to be blown by someone who had never heard the right sort of horn in a godswood. He sent the knowledge to the hall without moving his lips. Men rose. Women set down bowls and picked up axes. Hodor took his cudgel and kissed it and apologized to it for what he was about to do with it. Wyman set aside a trencher without finishing what was on it for the first time in the den's living memory. Osha smiled the smile of someone who has been waiting to take her satisfaction and sees the moment arrive like a deer that has finally stepped where the noose lies. "Warden," Wyman said, and his mouth made the word into something that could be put into soup without spoiling it. "To the crypt." He said it without an audience, which is how lords speak when they mean their words to do something, and not just be seen doing it. Rickon did not argue. He went with Bran into the dark, and the dark welcomed them as a way of saying it had missed them. He set his palm on his father's stone and swallowed audibly. He did not ask if his place was there for the length of whatever came next. He knew. Mira stood at the stairs with her spear, and Jojen lay with his head against the slab. The fever, a friend who had decided to be kind for one evening. "Listen," Jojen said. "Stand small and listen." Above, the first horn blew, a low, bitter sound that was answered by a higher, sweeter one from the east wall. The den moved like water into wood. Mountain men found purchase in the stone that city men skidded on. Wyman stood in the hall and became an object too large to move without tools. And the tools were under his hands. Osha went to the gatehouse and became something knives had to negotiate with. The first men over the fallen beams died, because they believed in the simple trick of being first. The second men died because they believed blunt sincerity could be confused with bravery. The third men lived long enough to retreat a step, because learning is slow and death is quick. The fourth men learned to be careful and died carefully. The fifth men waited and sent arrows, and remembered that fear is an arrow you can shoot into other men. Wyman's men responded with hot sand and a sudden door that had not been a door the last time anyone had looked that way. Bran stood inside Summer and felt the world with a clarity that broke his heart. He felt Osha's weight, left, right, left on the tight stairs, and felt the breath in her chest, and wanted to be her blade for the length of one heartbeat. He felt Wyman's attention fan out like a cloak and shelter men under it, who did not deserve shelter, unless one counted their choice to be in this hall at this hour as deserving. He felt the flayed men's banner catch and smolder, and be smothered by a den man with a sack, as if putting a child to bed. He felt, far away, a face he had seen in the moment the mouth had opened to say yes to the worst sort of pleasure. Ramsay was not there, but men who loved what he loved were. The fight was not a battle. It was a set of lessons given with the edge of necessity's hand. It ended not with a cheer but with a quiet like after a birth. Wyman sent the wounded to corners where women with hands like mothers and eyes like midwives dismissed their curses and patched their holes. He sent the dead to the places the dead are better in. He sent his steward to count. He sent a boy to the god's wood with a skin of beer and instructions to pour a measure under the tree and tell the gods it was thanksgiving and not bribery. He sent for Bran when he had breath enough to climb down to places where other men had gone to hide and had been found by their fear. "Warden," he said to Rickon, and the word had become part of the hall now. "We kept it." Rickon did not smile. He had watched the fight through the stone the way a boy in a hall watches grown men dice, eagerly, and with a hollow forming inside him like a new organ. "We kept it this time," he said. He had a man's caution in a boy's voice. It sounded right. "We'll have to keep it again." Bran put his hand on the slab. The old kings watched with eyes no more blind than any man's when he is full of himself and thinks he sees forever. He sent out a message he did not adorn with nouns and verbs. It was the pulse of a kept thing. It was a drum in snow. It went through roots, through stone, through bark, through men who kept old promises hung on hooks in the backs of their minds, where their wives could not see them. And it came back with the sound of 1,000 small agreements. Outside, the first of the Mormont boats came in above the ice like dark thoughts finally spoken aloud. And women with hair caught in braids like warning signs stepped into the shallows and waded ashore with axes high. Behind them, on a far road, a band of Norries made a joke about how fat men run, and laughed, and ran anyway, because Wyman had made himself one of their jokes, and therefore one of their own. On the Dreadfort Road, a Frey with more luck than skill found himself with an arrow in his calf, and lay weeping in a ditch where a den boy put a hand on his mouth and said, "Shh," because kindness and practicality sometimes look exactly alike in the dark. That night, Wyman set a small feast because a large one would have been an insult to the dead and to the kitchens. He carved a piece of lamprey pie and took one bite and put his fork down and wiped his mouth and said, "Without joking, we will need more flour." The room laughed because they had to, because the thing they had chosen for their lives required a laugh whenever one could be found. After the bowls had been collected and the axes wiped and the mouths kissed, Bran and Rickon went to the godswood as if visiting an elder who had dozed through the family's noise and now wanted to hear a summary. They stood under the carved face and set their hands on bark and stone and did not speak for a time. "We are doing it," Rickon said at last, as if not quite believing the present could be made to behave. "We are actually doing it, Bran." "We are," Bran said. "We are not done. We are only just started." Rickon's fingers curled and uncurled. "Good," he said. "I like starting. It feels like being allowed to continue." Bran closed his eyes. He saw the river and the sea and the road. He saw a hall where a man with a banner of knives tasted a piece of meat and found it sweeter than it should be, and swallowed and smiled, and did not guess why. He saw a girl on an island writing in bark and then biting it to make a hole. He saw a woman in the rills tying her hair back, and putting on the dress she kept for weddings and war. He saw Hodor sleeping with a dog snoring into the crook of his arm. He saw the north as a hand making a fist very slowly, so that the blood would not be trapped the wrong way. He took his hand off the bark and opened his eyes and put his palm flat on the stone above their father's bones. "We keep," he said, and the word went away from him and returned multiplied, as if the whole country had been waiting to hear it and had practiced the echo while no one watched.